Yes. If not, I can always send them to you through email. Okay. All right, are we all ready to rock and roll? Okay. All the obstacles thrown up my way, and I'm still able to do this in class. Thank you, laptop, Camtasia. I've MacGyvered this whole thing up here, so I'm like the AV nerd. All right, I will be passing around the super highly modernized, sophisticated attendance sheet. Please make sure that you sign that before class is done. Anyway, welcome back, everyone. Hope you all had a nice weekend, and I hope that you had an opportunity to read the Howard Wiarda chapter, the article, Comparative Politics, Past and Present. And if you walked away thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Don't worry, because today my job is to help extrapolate the important stuff from that. So today is somewhat of a short, but very important lesson. And that is, today you're getting the origin story of comparative politics, both as a subfield of political science, as well as a methodology, right? And everybody needs a origin story. This is, Comparative Politics comic series number 1, okay? So with the material that I've already given you, for the most part, today is going to be just listen, and if you have any additional questions or whatever, feel free to interrupt me at any point by just raising your hand. But today is a backstory into the discipline, but also the thing that we are going to get out of today's lesson, if you get nothing else out today, we will be discussing the importance of what we call grand theory. Grand theory. And this is not just within comparative politics, but within political science as a whole. And even more so, the idea of whether or not a grand theory can exist within the social sciences as opposed to the natural sciences. And by the way, you do know the difference between the social and the natural sciences, right? Give me an example of a natural science. Biology, okay? Another one. Physics. Chemistry. Okay. And give me an example of a social science. History. Anthropology. Psychology. Philosophy. Sociology. And we're missing one. The obvious one. Political science. Now here's the thing with political science. Now I've been in this business for 20 years, so I have a little street cred in saying this. No one knows what the hell to do with political science. Because within the discipline, you got maybe about half of the people, in fact, maybe even a little bit more, desperately wanting this thing to be a quantitative study, okay? Quantitative, numbers, statistics, charts, graphs, all that kind of good stuff, right? Regression models, thank God you don't have to do that in this class. I don't know what that is. The other half of political science are those that truly believe, right, that it is a social science. Very similar to history, anthropology, sociology, psychology. There's also one other one. We're missing one. Begins with an E.
English.
Economics. Although, English is more like a liberal art thing, of a humanities thing, right? But I was thinking of economics. And you remember when I said this last week, right? Political science is really good if you pair it up with another social science. Right? You do poli-sci in economics, you do poli-sci in history, poli-sci in anthropology. Yeah, you're going to be doing some really neat stuff. Can you pair up poli-sci with a natural science? It can be done, especially if you want to do like public health or world health or anything else like that. You can do poli-sci with bio, poli-sci with pharmacy if you really even want to do that, okay? So the origin story of political science is trying to figure out just what exactly is it. Because those that want to hang out with the natural science people, poli-sci is kind of like that weird kid in high school that doesn't know what table at the cafeteria to sit at. And they want to sit at the table with the natural scientists, the bios, the chems, the physicists, and they're all like, get out of here, nerd, whatever, you're weird, you're not cool enough, right? And then you've got kind of like the social science crowd in the back. Hey, poli-sci, why don't you hang out with us? And you're like, oh my God, you're too dorky and nerdy for me, right? So we don't really know what to do, right? The idea, and why am I talking about this, is because poli-sci is unfortunately one of those disciplines that tries to straddle both at the same time. Now, back in the day, I used to also assign another article alongside Wiarda, Comparative Politics and the Comparative Method by R.N. Leipart. Now, I took this article out just because Leipart is really good in explaining the nuts and bolts of political science, but man, is he boring. Like, I used to assign that article back at Rutgers so I could get a number of people to drop the class, just so I could have a more like workable group of students, right? And it's kind of like, you know, baptism by fire. They look at this and like, oh shit, I'm out of here, right? Now, we got a smaller group here. I can explain Leipart to you in about 10, 15 minutes without having you to read the damn thing. If you read Wiarda, you're in good shape. So where do we go from here? The first thing to ask is, how scientific is political science, right? And we've already talked about the differences between the natural and the social sciences. The more natural we get, the chems, the bios, the physics, you're like, oh yeah, that's very scientific, right? There's no one questions that, right? No one has any problems with that. But when we get to the social sciences, history, sociology, psychology, anthropology, right? Is it really a science, or is it more of a liberal art type of thing, right? Is it more of a, I don't know, like a philosophy? And political science is kind of like in the middle because we're hung up on this word, science, all the time. So should we be more scientific? But how can one be scientific when one studies human behavior, patterns of human belief, and in a way, if we think about this, the natural sciences come up with axioms that we take at not just face value, but there's a, you know, like the, you know, biochemistry, physics, they produce these things that we have to memorize and understand. What are they? What do you think they are?
Equations.
Even more than equations give us this.
Studies.
Like solutions?
Even higher than that.
Theories.
Theory? What's higher than a theory?
Hypothesis.
I don't know, maybe even higher than that. The blanks of physics, the blanks of chemistry, the laws, okay? This is the thing. Natural sciences give us laws. Social sciences give us theories. And this is not just vocab. What's the difference between a law and a theory? Is there a difference, or are we just playing around with words?
Yeah, well, the theory is made up by trying and error, trial and error, and the law is more of like established thing. The theory is more, you can manipulate more theory, not so much a law.
Okay, that's one a little bit more. I'll take the second one. You can manipulate a theory a little bit more than a law. Obviously, theories and laws are come up through trial and error, right? You come up with all sorts of experimental disasters in the lab before you come up with something that works, and then you provide a law.
I mean, there's a difference between a law will be seen as very definite. For example, the law of gravity. If I throw something up in the air, it's going to come back down. There's no question about that.
Right.
But if there's a theory saying that is this going to happen all the time in political science, for example, just something random, and you say it's not always going to happen. You have certain circumstances that you test, and you say this has happened like 90% out of 100 times. But that doesn't make it a law because it doesn't happen 100% of the time.
Okay, so the big thing to walk away from, very good alien, is that a law is a law no matter what. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Whether it's in the United States, whether it's in China, whether it's on Rigel 7, it don't matter, right? The laws of physics are the same no matter what around the universe. The laws of gravity, the laws of mathematics, the laws of chemistry, right? These are the things that it doesn't matter. And for the most part, laws cannot be refuted. Theories are things that seem to work most of the time, right? But theories are much more falsifiable. In other words, we're much more likely to change theory over time than we are with laws. Especially when we're working with, when you think about this with political science or social science, What is the one variable that we're working with almost constantly? You're working with what? Theory? Okay, but because we're working with theories, what's the primary variable that we're working with in poli-sci? People. You're working with people, right? And people do weird things sometimes. People's views and beliefs are often, remember the whole thing we talked about last week? Political culture, economy, introduces why people do the things that we do here. I saw the gears turning in Anastasia's head about why, whatever it is. I love that, right? But the point to be made here is that people will make decisions based on what values and opinions that they will have in a way that asks us, can we conduct research in political science in the same manner as the hard sciences? No? Now you think about this in the hard sciences, what do we have? You took bio, you took chemistry, you took whatever it was, right? In addition to having a class, what else would you have?
Lab.
A lab. Can you kind of experiment on people? I mean, it's kind of unethical. It's kind of problematic. I mean, unless you really want to go like hardcore psychology, of course, you can, use people all the time, put a little pasta strainer over their heads and scan their brains, or whatever it is, right? But when it comes to the social sciences for the most part, and look, this university does not have enough money to, sponsor that type of human experimentation. So in many cases, we have to kind of go on observation. Hence the difference between a theory and a law. A law is something that is pretty much universal, and no one really denies. The social sciences give us theories. And these theories are drawn from conclusions based on observable information. Okay? Now, for the most part, people who want to go the more quantitative route in political science are still going to be like, okay, mathematics, statistics, run that regression model, quantify everything as possible, give us a nice chart and graph. The rest of us are saying, yeah, that's all fine and good, but sometimes you might be able to understand why people do the things that they do by not being a statistician, but maybe being a better historian. It's like you want to understand Russian politics a little bit better. What do you think is quite possibly one of the most important things in order for you to do if you want to understand Russian politics or Russian political culture?
Speak Russian.
Speak Russian. Learn the goddamn language. Right? Want to do Middle Eastern politics? Arabic's probably going to help you. Maybe Persian. Hey, you want to do Latin American stuff? Spanish? Want to hang out in Brazil? Portuguese? Learn the language. Because within the language, right? And by the way, you do know that this course is part of that IR certificate, so we got to talk about this stuff, right? Language oftentimes comes with different meanings and understandings, right? So with all of that, could we be historians with an argument? See, this is really the big thing within political science. And so this leads us to really 4 broad methodologies within the scientific studies, going from the most law to, a documentary on National Geographic. Experimental, statistical, comparative, and case study. Okay? And in each one of these, right, the researcher is given an opportunity to make theories based on partial correlations. Now, the most scientific is the experimental. We'd run something in lab, water boils at, I'm using Celsius here.
100.
100. And it freezes at 0. Okay, no matter where. Okay? By the way, within the scientific field, even in the United States, we do this. What is the universal form of measurement?
Not universal?
Universal form of measurement.
Celsius.
No, not just in temperature. Metric system. Okay? Metric system. Okay? Hell, even American scientists use the metric system. Okay? How long is a kilometer? I don't care. Metric system says that. Cool. I'm not denying that. Right? How long is a centimeter? Well, 100 of those equals, 1 meter. How long is a kilometer? 1,000 meters. Well, how long is a meter? I don't know. It just says this, and no one questions it. Even here in the United States, we're the weirdos that use the royal system, right? What was it? Fahrenheit? When does water boil?
I think that's your answer.
water boil, Fahrenheit?
16.
Nope.
12.
212. When does water freeze?
32.
32. Okay, that one you know. Okay. How many inches are in a foot? 12. How many feet are in a yard? 3. How many feet are in a mile? A lot. 5,280. Why? I don't know, but we just do it. Okay? Those are laws as well, but they're highly interpretive. Where does political science fit? For the most part, here, within the statistical or the comparative, and it really is kind of like this area here where we start less numbers, more interpretations. Here's the numbers, here's the history. Here's the graph, here's the anthropology. Right? Here's the chart, here's the regression model, and here's the long-winded story about why people do the things that they do. Okay? The case study model is basically just one case. All it does is it just describes. By this point, you're hanging out with the anthropologists. Right? It's really up here that we're in political science. So that in order to understand where political science is, this is the natural, poli-sci is somewhere in the middle, and our happy hippy-dippy colleagues on the 8th floor hang out down here. Now the big question is, you want to do good political science? You've got to date somebody either here or here. Okay? Now if you're all big on numbers, this might be it. But you're going to be kind of boring. You'll kind of win arguments, but, it's like the chemists and the biologists are always going to wonder why you're hanging out on Metcalf. You want to be really in depth, right? Hang out with the historians, the anthropologists, and the sociologists. Why do people do the things that they do? Well, I don't know, but first let's just kind of investigate the local talk radio. Maybe that'll help us understand. Does that have anything to do with experimental? No, that is very much anthropological. You want a good study in political anthropology? Start watching Fox News. Might not be the most enjoyable thing out there, but it helps you understand why people think what they do. Okay? So the statistical versus the comparative methods. This is really the big one within poli-sci, right? Which one do we do? Quantitative versus qualitative. As I've already mentioned, the statistical method is the more scientific. And most poli-sci departments around the United States, especially if you want to get a job in political science, they really tend to focus on the statistical method. Okay? They love this stuff. Why? I don't know, but they just do. Okay? They just do. And I think it's because the number of case studies that you can use when you're trying to run some research project can be anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15, even 20 for that. Now, you can do a whole bunch of countries, a whole bunch of cases at the same time because everything is reduced to some standardized form of measurement and codification. Everything is reduced to an Excel equation, ones and zeros, right? Ones and zeros. Now, what this does is it gives us prefabricated categorizations that make things a little bit more bite-sized and able to understand, okay? One very good example of this is Freedom House. Any of you ever heard of this think tank before, Freedom House? You can go online. It's like a research group that measures, you ready for this? The degree of freedom in every country. All 193, plus a couple of territories, right? And they quantify the degree of freedom in a country on a numerical scale from 1 to 7. 1 being the most free, and 7 being North Korea. And the degree of freedom is measured really within 2 units of analysis. Democratic rights, political rights and civil liberties, right? Political rights and civil liberties. So each country is analyzed every year, and whatever is analyzed is dumped either into political rights or civil liberties, and they're all given scores of 1 to 7. And from 1 to 2.5 is considered to be free. 2.51 to 5.5 is partly free. These are your hybrid regimes. And then anything 5.51 on to 7 are what we call not free. Okay? And that's it. and we take the political rights score, we take the civil liberties score, we average them together, booyah, color code. Okay? If you're a free country, your country's in green. If you are a partly free country, your country is in yellow. And if you're a not free country, your country is like dark blue or something like that, right? Whatever it is. Okay? And you can look at the map very easy and go, oh, look at that. You know, United States, most of Europe, there's New Zealand hanging out down there, all nice and free. You know, then you got like Asia, which is all like dictatorship. Mongolia is just sitting there in the middle, all nice and democratic as well, and a lot of they all, right? And it's pretty easy to do. Okay? Now the thing is that you can kind of take that at face value and say, all right, it is what it is. But when you start asking why, right? Why are the countries given the ratings that they are? That's when we get more qualitative. Now, not to bias this whole thing, but this is where I step in, okay? Because I'm kind of like a historian masquerading as a political scientist, right? I'm like a historian with like an argument, or like a job, or something like that, right? And this requires us to look at comparative historical analysis. So, for example, Al, you were talking about this fellow classmate of yours that had me in the honors research seminar last year, where we read a lot about Italian political history. Okay? And in order to understand the role of civil society in Italy, right, I gave them a whole bunch of things on 19th and 20th century Italian civic movements, different communal laws and everything else like that, right? And it's interesting, but it's a lot of historical stuff. But here's where we have to rely on other social science disciplines. That's when history, sociology, anthropology, psychology comes into play. In order to do good political science, you're going to have to modify your stuff with these additional areas. Now, this requires us to just spend a lot more time looking at one particular case. And yeah, you know what this also does? It legitimizes study abroad. It legitimizes, hey, I need to, if I want to study, I don't know, democracy in Spain. What better way to study democracy in Spain than to go to Spain? Well, spend a couple of weeks in Madrid, spend a couple of weeks in Barcelona, do a couple of weeks in Toledo, maybe down in Andalusia, catch a football match. It's cool, right? And I'm doing this all for poli-sci. If you do this, you're just running an Excel program. If you do this, you're going on study abroad. So this, I think, makes it a little bit more interesting, but it reduces our case studies because, there's only so much time and there's only so much space that we can use. So 5 cases at the absolute. If you're doing 5 cases, you're working with a team of people, right? It makes it fun, but which one gives you the better approach, okay? Now here's where the internal debate gets kind of fuzzy, right? And we actually use the term fuzzy in the discipline, right? Because if we go with the quantitative, let's just stick statistics, numbers and shit like that, right? By inferring correlation in the absence of hard quantitative data, it kind of carries a degree of subjectivity and interpretation. In other words, you decide that you're going to, oh, look, somebody did a study on Italian civic politics, or someone did a study on comparative democratic movements in Spain. You think to yourself, okay, they did their research, but why do they come up with the things that they do? And a lot of times in poli-sci, we're like, well, they missed that, or they emphasized too much on this, and you can kind of nitpick their research because you can be like, oh, there's a little bit of bias that goes into it. There's a little bit of, didn't have access to all of the files or archives or whatever it is, right? So what may seem clear to the researcher may not seem clear to his or her colleagues, and might be completely incomprehensible to those that are actually understood, right? So it's like, I'm going to go to Spain, and I'm going to look at the different degrees of communal democratic institutions throughout the country, and I know exactly what I want to look at, but I'm going to start talking to people within Spain, and they're going to be like, democracy? What democracy? Everything comes out of Madrid. It doesn't really matter, Like, they're going to tell you something completely different, because for them, they just don't see it in the same way, right? Or I could be like, I don't know, I'm going to go to Haiti, and I'm going to say, well, what could possibly work? What could we do to make this country a little bit more productive, a little bit more, I don't know, whatever. Oh, well, what if we take this that I see over there and that I see over there, and I'm going to write a nice little, I don't know, article and get it to work. You want to know what most people in Haiti are going to say? That's just not going to happen. Because the whole country is just corrupt as shit. So why bother, right? So the point that I'm trying to make here is that one type of study might seem to work for the political scientist. But if the people themselves don't understand it or believe in it or whatever it is, I mean, at the absolute best, okay, you publish an article in a journal that no one ever reads. And you get, I don't know, tenure or promoted or something like that. I'll go.
Do institutions or even media generally take the reliability of comparative or statistical like over the other?
Most of the time, institutions are going to be more likely to go statistical over comparative. And that's just simply because it's easier to understand and everyone likes a line graph. You know, the qualitative stuff can get you, I think, a better answer, but it involves a real long narrative, you know, a big essay to write. Okay? So how can we test for accuracy and objectivity? Well, we could just increase the number of cases. You know? Add more cases to see if the theory continues to work, add more cases. If the theory continues to work, great, it's a great theory. Okay? The problem is within the quantitative, the more cases you add and the more quantitative you get, the more you kind of glop over the specifics of each case, you know? So Freedom House. What defines political rights in Denmark may be completely absent in Djibouti. Does that mean that political rights or civil liberties are absent in Djibouti, or Namibia, or Haiti, or Cambodia? No. But are we looking for the right things? I mean, that's another thing. If we're only going to do quantitative, you know, we just kind of look for that one thread that unites everything, and oftentimes you miss a lot of the specifics. So political scientists can also simplify analysis by factoring out a whole bunch of stuff. Okay? So which one is a better one to use? Which one's a better one to look for? Okay? Well, this leads us to ask, is this just based on observation and interpretation? Well, kind of. Which means that the burden is on us to be good researchers, right? If we did our homework, if we soaked and poked, if we, you know, looked at every little aspect out there, yeah, we might be able to come up with the answer. The only thing is that, and this is also a big, especially in older political science studies, we oftentimes like to come up with a theory that validates our own point or makes the United States or the West look out to be better than everyone else, right? So within that idea of democracy in Italy, there is this thing, the more north you go, the better democracy, the more south you go, the worse it gets, right? Bruno.
I'm from the south of Italy, where like my family has the house and all that.
Where in South Italy?
Calabria.
Okay, that's as south as it can get.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible, like the corruption.
Okay, so here's the thing, and that's one of the things that people look to. The more south you go in Italy, the corruption just goes up through the roof. You're in northern Italy, it's a bit more technocratic, things work better. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Italy. If you've been to North Italy, Central, South, you know, there's this correlation that I like to joke around, especially with Europe. The further north in Europe you go, the politics gets better, but the food gets worse. The more Mediterranean you go, the politics becomes dysfunctional, but man, you're going to eat good. Okay? And that's the same for the Middle East. In fact, you just continue to go south through the Mediterranean. You hit Egypt, you know, it's the same thing. Politics are shit, but well, food's good. The hospitality is good. Now, here's the thing about Calabria. Does that mean that democracy is better or worse than, let's say, in Venice, or in Bologna, or in Milan? Well, that's up for interpretation.
But the problem with Italy is the corruption, because
Okay, so again, we're going to get into my political culture class here, but why does the mafia exist in some parts of the country and not others? Historically speaking, if you just simply say, mafia, bad, corruption, but if you decide to do a little bit more historical research, you're like, the mafia exists in southern Italy because it's an organization that promised to deliver goods and services to the people where the local government either chose not to do so or couldn't do, right? So it's like in the absence of formal institutions, will a grassroots do-it-yourself thing happen? Some of you had me in that African cities class, or remember, right? Informal and informal. There you go. Look at this. Everything comes full circle again, right? Back in the day, and when I say back in the day in New York, I'm talking like the 1970s, 1980s, okay? You took your life into your hands when you rode the subway, just so you know. Okay? The NYPD was like, fuck it, I'm not even going down there. Okay? So what ended up happening? Effectively, a do-it-yourself vigilante group called the Guardian Angels was created. You might have even seen some of them riding the subways today, right? You got the little red berets and little, like, I don't know, like glitter jackets or whatever. Yeah. Curtis Lee was the founder of that, right? Now, why did the Guardian Angels form? Because the public wanted some kind of safety and security from being robbed, mugged, raped, or a combination of the above, right? Murdered as well. So if the NYPD is not going to be down there, then some other group is going to do. Now, if we base our research on the presence of formal institutions, we could look at New York at the time and say the place was, one step away from the apocalypse, Mad Max or whatever it was, right? Instead, the formation of the Guardian Angels gives us this understanding that in the absence of government, the public is going to do something about it. Now, does that give an indication of democracy? Some kind of democracy. Quantitative studies would say, no, does not compute. Qualitative studies would say, maybe, right? Maybe. But a lot of times, established academia is going to be more so if I see things in other countries that look like what's happening in the United States or Britain or France, then yeah, country good. If I see things that aren't like that, country bad. Hence, southern Italy, not as good as the north, depending on what you are measuring, right? Depending on what you are looking at. Does this all make sense so far? No one's confused? Okay. That leads us to Wiarda's article. Okay? Any questions so far? So I'm about to really give you the origin story here now. Are we all good? Everybody happy? Okay. So the Wiarda piece is an assigned reading, and as I said, I want to make certain that you walk away from class today understanding what grand theory is. Okay? Grand theory. Okay? I've already talked about comparative politics as a methodology. We can skip over that. Okay. Here we go. In the beginning, literally in the beginning, was the Word. And the Word was grand theory. And grand theory embraced the concept of modernization. In nomine Patri, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Okay? Literally, this is the beginning of the comparative political science field. The understanding of, is there a grand theory that we can apply to the world to explain everything? Okay? Grand theory, can it work? In the same way as a law, right? There's the grand law of physics, the grand law of biology, whatever it is, right? Whatever it happens to be, laws are laws are laws. Can we come up with a theory as well? This was something that exploded onto the field right after the Second World War. Okay? United States, Great Britain, win, well, alongside the Soviet Union, wherever it is, right? The idea is that the development of political science started out prior to that as really a study of comparative European systems. We look at Britain, we look at France, we look at Germany, we look at Scandinavia, Spain, whenever we get around to it, right? You get the idea. Now the idea is let's look at a number of emerging governments and countries following 1945, especially beginning around the 1950s, when a big phenomenon is happening around the world. 1950s, 1960s. What's happening? Around Africa, Middle East. Latin America already experienced this. But it's a big global thing that's happening. What's going on? Any history nerds out there?
Spread of democracy.
Even before the spread of democracy.
The spread of God and church.
Nope, that happened way beforehand.
Spread of communism.
Is alongside of this, spread of democracy, spread of communism, but this kind of thing allowed either the spread of communism or democracy to kind of compete with one another.
Industrial age.
Kind of, sort of. What? Oh, no. Not just yet. Forget that.
Well, the Nazis tell us.
No, Nazis are dead, they're gone, whatever. What's happening around Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia, Rocky? Decolonialization. Right? Decolonialization. Right? Right? You'll remember, like right after World War II, like most of Africa was like owned by someone else. Same thing with the Middle East. Southeast Asia, right? Latin America already had their wars of independence against Spain and Portugal, right? But the idea of decolonialization meant that suddenly a whole bunch of new countries were emerging. They're all entering the United Nations, whatever, right? So the big thing within political science at the time was, all right, we're going to teach you kids this thing about democracy or modernization or whatever it was, right? Now, I want you to go out into the world. I want you to pick a country, and you can go into Africa, you can go to the Middle East, you can go to Southeast Asia. You can't go to Eastern Europe. Why? Can't go to Eastern Europe. Communism just it's closed off. You just can't go there, okay? And that's like the one area. But you can hang out in Africa. You can hang out everywhere. Like, you want to even run around in Latin America. That's kind of cool too. The goal here is to look at a country and figure out whether or not this country is capable of developing democracy. Simple as that, right? And so this was kind of the method. And what was the theory that was used? We're going to talk about this in a minute. Modernization theory, right? Modernization theory already existed within the political science discipline. The question was, can we elevate modernization theory to grand theory? In other words, can we use modernization theory to explain everything happening around the world? Okay? You'll get what I'm saying, right? So modernization theory exists as modernization theory, but can that be grand theory? Okay? This is what became gospel, Anastasia. This is what became gospel within political studies around the 1950s. Is, oh my God, modernization theory is so awesome, it's so cool. Let's use that as a way of, checking out. Are these countries going to go democratic, or are they going to go communist? Right? That's the whole thing. And so modernization theory actually has an origin really itself. The idea is coined by one political scientist, Seymour Martin Lipset, who wrote this article, Some Social Requisites of Democracy, in the 1959 edition of the American Political Science Review. Okay? Just so you know, the APSR is the primary academic journal of political science. I haven't assigned anything in it to you because articles in the APSR oftentimes serve as a cure for insomnia. Okay? But it's one of those things, you publish in the APSR, you're awesome as far as poli-sci is concerned. And Lipset's article effectively said the following. The more modernized a country is, the greater the likelihood for democracy and development. That's it. The more modern the country is, the more likely the country will become democratic. Simple as that. Okay? In reality, Lipset, he's very much pro-Western. Got to remember, it's 1959, Cold War, Soviet Union, America versus Russia, democracy versus communism. So the idea is that really the more a country is like the US or Great Britain. It wasn't specifically mentioned, but you can kind of read through the lines, right? Modernization like America, like Great Britain, okay? So Canada, for instance, awesome, right? It's modern, it's developed, it's a bit more like Britain than the United States, but you guys got parliament, right? You've got a royal family over there, right? You've got multi-party elections, you've got this, you've got that. Canada's awesome, okay? So is France, so is West Germany, right? Obviously, so is America, Australia, New Zealand, yes. Now, let's look at Mexico. Let's look at Italy. Let's look at Haiti. Let's look at Nigeria, South Africa, Israel, India, Pakistan. You get the idea, right? We're literally sending grad students out into the world, becoming doing a little soaking and poking. Now, here's the $64,000 question. What is modernization measuring? What are they measuring is the levels of economic development, the role of an entrepreneurial class, the degrees of literacy, how well defined one's citizenship is, and the amount of political plurality. Now, if you think about this for a minute here, folks, anything wrong with this stuff? Just from a general observation, is there anything wrong with this stuff here? Would you agree that if a country has this stuff, the country is modern, right? Nothing wrong with it. And by the way, when we talk about an entrepreneurial class, it's a nice way of saying what other type of, what is really, is another big thing as far as democracy and poli-sci is concerned. This class of people, you gotta have them in order to be the best guarantee for democracy. Middle class. Right, middle class. Why middle class, Abdullah?
They're not rich to the point that they control society, neither are they poor, that they don't influence society as much as they should.
So what exactly then makes them so important? Where's their wealth come from?
They're the workers. They're the general population that's working, that's voting, that's doing everything.
Okay, so the middle class are those that generate wealth through industry, through labor, through whatever, right? The upper class, they get their wealth through inheritance. The poor, well, who gives a crap about them, right? It's the middle class.
Also factories.
Oh, yeah, well, factory work, middle class are people that are upwardly mobile, right? So you start out working in a factory, you save up money, and what's the American dream? Get a house, right? You start out living in some ethnic neighborhood of New York because that's where you all came over on the boat. What's your goal? Move out of that neighborhood, all right? And that's the Great Migration. Half of y'all went to Long Island, the other half of y'all went to New Jersey. Okay? My old man went to New Jersey in the 70s. Okay? So the idea is that if it's an upwardly mobile and affluent class of people, that also presumes the existence of taxation system, an education system, high degrees of literacy, decent health care, industry, nothing out of the ordinary, right? Right? Okay. Was there a couple of hands I saw, or should we move on? We're good? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Bo.
Just in terms of like the grand theory, wouldn't there be a lot of holes just because there weren't too many examples at that moment?
Oh, see, here's where we're getting at. Obviously, you looked ahead. The point is this. After about a year or two, all these grad students are coming back to their universities in the United States. And the bulk of their projects are either the country that I studied was inconclusive or incompatible. Right? Inconclusive or incompatible. Hey, I just came back from Nigeria. Nope, not going to work. Hey, I just came back from Pakistan. Holy shit, wow. Right? Now, there's a couple of countries that might work.
UK.
Well, the UK was already like one of the big establishments, so no one's going to the UK, you know? But India, it's got potential. It's got potential, but that's a long way off. Israel is a big one. But then again, Israel's kind of a weird one because Israel is more or less a state founded by Europeans, right? But it's, okay, Israel's good. South Africa has got potential. Then again, South Africa is kind of also still more or less a colony. Turkey was a good one. And that's also because of the policies of Mustafa Kemal. But Iraq, Egypt, Bolivia, Ghana, Gabon, Mali, you get the idea, right? So it's like, well, no, it's just not going to work at all. So incompatible, 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 incompatible. Was that right? Here is where, right, grand theory becomes a bit more elusive because we can't really find what we're looking for in the developing world, right? Which leads us to ask, okay, well, what are we measuring? If we're told modernization theory is the existence of an affluent middle class, an established education system, infrastructure, highways, schools, libraries, whatever, right? That's not to say that it won't exist in Algeria or Vietnam, but it's just simply not existing now. Want to talk about modernization? Want to talk about industry? In the 1950s, 1960s, North and South Korea still existed, right? It existed back then. Which one was the better one back then? Anyone know? Which one was the better one?
North Korea.
North Korea. North Korea had all of the prospects of working, right? South Korea was a basket case. It was an absolute dysfunctional disaster. Where is South Korea today in comparison to North Korea? I mean, you just can't even compare, right? But back then, all the industry was in the north. South Korea was a little bit of an agricultural backward. So the point that I'm trying to make here in all of this is when grad students are armed with a certain set of criteria to look for and evaluate and compare, are we in fact using criteria from existing case studies like the US and the UK that are far more advanced than what we are experimenting in that area? You understand what I'm saying? So it's not a surprise that we're going to find some more positive cases in Israel because of the industry that comes with European settlership, or Turkey, which was already going through a period of process of modernization from the 1920s. Oh, and here's the other thing. The things in those countries that were considered to be far more important to the population, right? Religion, cultural traditions, and little idiosyncrasies, those were seen as obstacles, right? Those were seen as obstacles. Culture, whether we like it or not, does matter, right? When we think of the United States or the UK, we think, well, culture has either been harnessed for industry or secularized, no? Or, God has kind of been, caged or stuck in some art museum or whatever it is, right? But when religion, local customs and stuff like that still permeates, right, the collective minds of the people, that's seen as primitive, right? That's seen as somehow an obstacle for progress. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, this stuff still exists in the world today. So you look at U.S. foreign policy, right? You're like, well, what's the best way of democratizing Iraq? What's the best way of democratizing Afghanistan, right? Well, the first thing we've got to do is just kind of, filter out the culture, right? Which is actually kind of presumptuous on our parts. Can you imagine somebody saying on the outside, and people have said this on the outside, and I'm talking to a good number of international students, people are like, what the hell's the matter with America? Like, well, one thing that's wrong with America is the culture itself as well. Can you imagine somebody from the outside going to large parts of this country and saying, you need to fix your culture? That ain't gonna work, right? That's not gonna work at all. Hell, the 2004 presidential election between George W. Bush and John Kerry, John Kerry gets in front of the microphone, some press conference or whatever, and this was the speech that killed his aspirations. He basically says, I just came back from a 2 to 3 week vacation in the French Riviera, which already was strike one. Right? Remember, this is 2004. This is the era of Team America, World Police, freedom fries, freedom toast, crazy, crazy, crazy American patriotism. And we hated the French. John Kerry's like, oh, I was vacationing in France for 3 weeks. Okay, strike one. Number two, I spoke to all of my friends in France and Germany, and they said that they want me to win the election. And I was like, that's it, he's fucked. Because every other red-blooded, beer-drinking American was like, oh, John Kerry is the friend of the French. Screw that, I'm voting for the other guy. Right? And you know that in American political culture, there is that thing of, I don't care about, I'm voting for this guy, not because he's going to do anything for me, but I'm going to, quote-unquote, own the libs. You do know this, right? So in many cases, that's culture. So the understanding is that culture, along with these theories, gets in the way of modernization and progress. Now, is that correct? Not really. Another thing for us to come away with is that if we understand that these students that were doing their research were going to large parts of the world and they were looking for something based on whatever criteria their instructors told them, are they going to find what they're looking for? And here, another vocab word that we get, conceptual stretching. Conceptual stretching is a fallacy in research that leads to erroneous conclusions about countries or societies being dysfunctional. Okay? So if, let's say, we were just talking about this before. If I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to a country, and I was told to look for the number of people involved in the local PTA, Parent-Teacher Association, because we got a lot of people in the PTA in America. That makes democracy good. So I'm going to go to Mauritania, Africa, and I'm going to go to the local official and say, where's your PTA chapters? And they're like, oh, what? PTA? What? Oh, no PTA chapters? Ooh, big X. Okay, the other thing I was told to look for is the number of entrepreneurial startup small businesses. Can you direct me to the Better Business Bureau of Mauritania? What? Ooh, another big X. See what I'm getting at here? Conceptual stretching, which, again, page 17 of your Wiarda reading, basically says that if you are looking for something that worked in one part of the world, under certain historical circumstances, why would you expect that to be in another part of the world that has a different history, was colonial, different religion, different set of circumstances? Right? If different countries take different paths towards development, maybe it's not the country that's the problem, but maybe your model is. Maybe modernization, it ain't there just yet. So with all of these, erroneous conclusions, we begin to think, okay, well, it's the culture, it's the culture, it's the culture. And what's even more so was that we got hit with a major sobering reality with the Vietnam War. Right? Now, we're just coming off of Afghanistan over the summer, right? And we're like, oh my God, these people didn't want democracy, fuck them, right? No, it wasn't that. But that's how we're talking about it in the news. It's amazing, because, what was it, 50 some, same thing with Vietnam. Oh my God, these people don't want democracy, fuck them. It's not that they didn't want democracy. They're not interested in American democracy, because American democracy was whatever was good for us, okay? But our defeat in Vietnam, you gotta think about this. United States, we're really good at defeating Nazis. You put Nazis in the field, we'll beat them. The only people that are better at defeating Nazis are the Russians. Okay? We'll do a great job. We win World War II all the time. It's fantastic. So how could we lose in Vietnam to basically a bunch of rice farmers? Was it because they have a better military? No. They just hated our culture. And you know, what was it, 2 days ago, 20-year anniversary of 9/11? I guarantee, I don't know where you all were, some of you probably were not even born on 9/11 back then, right? But you know what we were asking 2 days later? Why'd they do this to us? Why do they hate us? Why do they hate our freedom so much? Why do they hate the American way of life so much? And it's like, it's not that they hate our freedoms. It's not that they hate democracy or they hate liberty, right? But it's a different set of criteria. And again, I'm not excusing the 9/11 hijackers. But if you just simply base it on that principle, you're not going to get the answer that you're looking for. So after Vietnam, once again, like after 9/11, knowing that large parts of the world are just not interested in the democracy brochure that we're giving them, right? The conclusion was there's just large parts of the world that are culturally, historically, and institutionally incompatible with democracy, right? The Arab doesn't know anything about democracy. They don't want it. The Russian loves authoritarianism. That's why Putin has been in charge for 1,800 years, right? The Vietnamese, they don't know anything about democracy. They love a strong dictator, right? And you get these, I have to say, insensitive assumptions about large parts of the world outside of North America, Western Europe, and the Anglo-Saxon Pacific. Hell, we still come up with stereotypes of everybody south of the Rio Grande. Why is Mexican politics, why is Latin American politics much more dysfunctional and volatile than the United States and Canada? Is it because Hispanic culture is just more, I don't know, dysfunctional, superstitious, prone toward authoritarianism? You know, you can look at the state of affairs in Mexico, you can look at the rise of fascism in Brazil and say, well, that's got to be it. What about Haiti? Oh my God, Haiti's a basket case, you know? And some people are like, hey, you want to know what the big problem with Haiti is? I kid you not, this is what people, talking heads on TV say. They still practice voodooism. That's the problem right there. You know? We need to like convert them to like Protestantism or something like that, right? It's like, no, I hate the voodooism. I hate to break it to you. You know? Haiti, first and only country to successfully have a slave rebellion. Kicked out all the aristocrats, formed their own system, and then suffered the consequences as a result of it. But do we know about that? Not through this type of research. Now, is what I'm saying, like, you all getting this stuff? All getting this stuff? Okay. So, the thing is, for us to understand, not everyone recognizing the absence of grand theory comes up with plausible explanations. You know? Oh, that country doesn't work. Oh, that region doesn't work. Why? Well, we're going to simply default to they're not Protestant. They're not Western European. They don't have the same degree of European civilization as we do, right? So political Eurocentrism will default to Western ethnocentrism. The West is the best, and the rest just follows us. And folks, let me tell you something. This is still something that is widely believed in the policy world. So if any of you want to go into, political science or do something within the international field, the government field, whatever it happens to be, the belief down in Washington and in the State Department is still, America, fuck yeah, it's awesome, right? Along with the UK, France, Germany, but even Eastern Europe, the Slav is a little, slower. The less said about Africa, the better. Asia is, corporatist, right? There's these assumptions, these stereotypes that come into it because of the understanding that large parts of the world, they didn't have a renaissance, they didn't have an industrial revolution, they didn't have a scientific revolution the way that we did. Now, if you follow that argument, yeah, of course, that's the case on it. But does that mean that Nigeria, Russia, Iraq, North Korea, Afghanistan, are they somehow devoid of potential for democratic development? No, of course not. Right? Absolutely not. Right? But to say that not everyone's going to become democratic because their culture forbids it or makes it impossible is an erroneous statement to make. Especially when, and you got to remember this, that during the same time, and somebody mentioned it beforehand, as we're trying to spread democracy through the developing world, what other ideology was kind of like competing with us? Communism. And guess what? Large parts of Africa and Latin America either A, adopted communism, or B, liked it. Because surprise, surprise, emerging former colonies are going to gravitate towards the philosophies of Marxism a lot more than free market capitalism, which defined what the colonies were. Right? Within Latin America, and I don't remember which country has the larger population here with this, but there is a type of Christianity in Latin America that espouses what is known as liberation theology. Anyone ever hear of liberation theology before? Anyone ever know about this thing, liberation theology? Liberation theology is a subsection of Catholicism. You all know, like Latin America is like heavy, heavy, heavy Catholic, right? Liberation theology argues, ready for this hot take? Jesus Christ was a communist. He's a socialist. He was a Marxist, right? And you think about this, Jesus was a Bernie bro. He totally would have hung out with Christ was Marx before Marx was Marxist, right? Give to the poor, everybody is equal before the eyes of God. Christ was basically, he was a rebel. He was a social democrat. He didn't hang out with the elite. He hung out with the dregs of society. And in a way, this effectively argues, right, that Christianity is very much compatible with Marxism. Leave it up to Latin America. Leave it up to Latin Americans to be like, the Russians are coming in with like, hey, would you like to know about this thing called communism? Communism is collectivization of agriculture, and they're like, I have no idea what that is, but I like the egalitarianism. You know what? Jesus was one. My abuelita loves that. And that's how it sells. And suddenly it's like, oh my God, Marxism is about to go religious in Latin America. How awesome would that be? And that scares the crap out of the Catholic hierarchy, who run to all of these little right-wing authoritarian dictatorships to be like, you need to put that stuff out. And what do? They run to the United States for help because, remember, as far as U.S. foreign policy is concerned, you can be any kind of ideology that you want in the Cold War. There's only one ideology you can't be. Communist. You can be right-wing to your heart's content. Because if you're right-wing, you're in favor of industrialism, you're in favor of corporatism. If you're communism, oh my God, we're going to nationalize the oil fields. Does that mean that Latin America is incompatible with democracy? No. What it does mean is that Latin America was about to develop its own form of democracy. That wasn't necessarily brand America. But here's the thing. Policymakers, as well as old, stubborn academics, folks, we will defend our shitty theory before we revise it. It doesn't matter. It's amazing. We're like, oh, no, the theory has to work. The people are just wrong, right? And that, unfortunately, kind of gave us, all right, grand theory doesn't work, but it gave us Clash of Civilizations. It's like, all right, well, it works for some people, and it doesn't work for others because, voodooism. I kid you not. These are the answers. So I'm just going to throw it right out there, folks. Rossi says there never really was a grand theory. Right? Was there a grand theory? No, there never was a grand theory. Okay? For a number of reasons. First of all, you can't really call it a grand theory if the principles are based on a small group of advanced industrialized countries. It's a great starting point, sure. All right, this works in France, it works in Germany, it works in Belgium, it works in America, it works in Canada. Cool. Let's apply this to the developing world. If it works, now we can call it a grand theory. If it doesn't work, oops, not a grand theory. Right? Is there anything particularly wrong with modernization theory itself? No. Lipset is fine. There's nothing wrong with modernization theory. But as grand theory, yes. at least what Lipset argues to be modernization. Right? Maybe if we modified modernization theory, we might be able to come, again, tenured academics, I'm not changing what I wrote. Okay? So the criteria was based along a narrow set of axioms and data sets that have been proven to be far too rudimentary. Hence, ladies and gentlemen, the limits to quantitative analysis. Quantitative analysis is going to say, okay, use this, this, and this. Okay? I'm told, use this, this, and this. All right, I'm going to go apply it here, here, and here. Don't work, don't work, don't work. Oh, well, I guess these three countries are incompatible. No. Maybe the criteria was problematic. Right? And look, let's be honest. It's the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, we're competing with the communists. Yeah, we're trying to market ourselves. Because we're trying to see if America can work in the developing world. And to be perfectly honest, by the time liberation theology starts to grow in Latin America, the Soviet Union doesn't care how hardcore Marxist-Leninist you are. You know what they're looking for? They're looking for allies. And so what if in Latin America religion plays a bigger role than the writings of Karl Marx? You know? No one reads Marx. You ever try reading Marx?
Yes, it's terrible.
It's long. It's, you know, I mean, Hegel is even more boring. And the less said about Max, I mean, this is the problem. Marx, Hegel, Weber. I mean, this is some heavy-duty stuff here.
Even not the most
For me.
boring, but it is boring.
It's-
It all makes sense.
Okay, you know, whatever. So, do you honestly believe that the average Paraguayan, Bolivian, or Mexican is reading Karl Marx? No, of course not. Okay, this is not happening. Okay, but if someone's like, "Hey, egalitarianism and the empowerment of the poor," you know who did that? JC. All right, that I can get onto. You know, scriptures from New Testament, whatever. You think about this. Jesus was a total socialist, which pisses evangelicals off to no reason. I love it. I love it. I'm like, yo, your boy is a hardcore lefty commie. You know, I don't know how you were able to take this left-wing radical and turn him into a paragon for the corporatist right. But again, I blame it a lot on the cultural left. It's like, oh, religion's stupid. I'm like, no, religion is a fantastic way of segueing ideas within culture. But that's a separate discussion to make here. Okay? So the point to be made here is that maybe there isn't a grand theory at all. Maybe we can come up with regional theories. You know, is there a theory that describes Latin America? Sure. One that describes Eastern Europe? I'm working on that one. How about Central Asia? Sure. Middle East? Why not? But a grand theory? Not so much. So, what can we do? You know, что делать? What can we do? Well, the first thing that we can do is realize that, guess what? Social science, it ain't a science. Stop pulling at that. You want science? Hang out with the biologist, the chemist, the physicist. Hang out in Metcalf. You're here in the humanities building? That's what we really are. We're a humanities. Empirical modeling can be practiced. No question about it. Right? But here's the other thing. No two areas of the world are the same. You can find a lot of overlap, but you're going to have to understand that every place that you look at, from a social science, humanities point of view, has their own ways of doing things. Hell, just take New York City, for instance. There's a theory of Manhattan, there's a theory of Brooklyn, there's a theory of Queens, there's a theory of the Bronx, and there's a crazy theory of Staten Island that I'm still trying to make sense of. Okay?
Yeah, it's just that off track.
You know that officially, Staten Island is called Richmond County, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
And Richmond County, you know what I'm going with this, Abdullah?
You do.
Okay. Richmond County is named after the Duke of Richmond. when New Amsterdam became New York, the Duke of Richmond was the king's bastard child, which I think is rather fitting for Staten Island. You know, what's Brooklyn officially called? Kings County. Queens is always Queens, right? Whatever it happens to be, right? So here's the thing, right? And we're just about almost out of time. Well, we get out of here at 2:45, right? Okay, cool. We're pretty much done. So, you know, I'm kind of teaching but soapboxing at the same time. Some say, and this is the thing that annoys me about political scientists. Now, here's the thing. I am a political scientist. I have a PhD in political science. Some of my best colleagues are political scientists. But man, we can sometimes be annoying people. We can be, and I say that as a political scientist. Okay, so it's just self-inflicted, you know, self-hate, self-love. Okay, so for most, you know, structuralists in political science, the theory doesn't work. We just need to make the theory work harder. No, that's the difference between a theory and a law. If the law doesn't work, either A, your experiment was done wrong, or B, whoa, you're about to win the Nobel Prize. When the theory doesn't work, first thing you want to check to see, is the theory still useful? That's why theories can change. Laws don't. So some argue, oh, we just need more rigorous statistical analysis. Nope. I would say, become better historians. Why is Staten Island the way that it is? I mean, if you really want to, I mean, you can do some anthropological studying around Highland Boulevard, you know, and, you know, it is the way that it is, right? Why do diaspora immigrant communities oftentimes tend to be the staunchest conservatives out there?
Because they don't want what they were living back home to repeat. That's why humans vote for Trump in Miami.
Okay. Why is it that, you know, why is it that diaspora communities end up being some of the most annoying obstacles to progress in this country? You know, like, hey, I would like Medicare for all. And every other Cuban in Miami is like, that's what we had with Castro. I was like, Castro's healthcare system is far better than what we have here. But like, no, that's communism, that's whatever it is, right? Okay, now you could look at that and say, y'all are fucked up. Or you could say, why do you think the way that you think? If you ask the second question, that's where qualitative work comes in. That's the difference between large N, the big statistical stuff, and small n. So I give you this promise. I am a qualitativist. We ain't doing any math in this class. We're not doing any statistical analysis. The only numbers that you will have to worry about are year dates, page numbers, and maybe Roman numerals. Okay? That is why we are going to spend the next 3 class sessions talking about what the hell makes a democracy. You think I can give you one definition? Can't. Hard to do. We're going to be looking at it in a far more behavioral, attitudinal, and cultural aspect. So, as you go, your homework for Wednesday is, at the absolute least, have Robert Dahl's Polyarchy read. Right? Save Linz and Stepan and Tocqueville for next week. You just have the Robert Dahl stuff read, you're in good shape. Okay? For those that did not sign up, please make sure that you just do so on your way out. And yeah, great seeing you all again. Be back on Wednesday.